Why are some countries incredibly rich while others seem completely trapped in poverty? It's literally the ultimate question about global inequality, isn't it? I mean, it's a puzzle that has kept economists, sociologists, and historians up at night for decades. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to unpack the fascinating, deeply influential, and honestly, highly debated theories that have tried to answer this massive global question.
We're going to demystify the complex frameworks that try to explain this global wealth gap. Specifically, we'll be looking at two absolute heavyweights in the world of development studies: modernization theory and dependency theory. And look, these aren't just abstract ivory tower ideas. These theories have actively shaped the modern world.
All right, let's dive right in. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The modernization playbook. 2. Rostow's 5 stages. 3. Flaws in the linear model. 4. The dependency theory alternative. And 5. Why these debates matter.
Okay, starting with part 1, the modernization playbook. To really understand this playbook, we have to travel back to the 1950s. During this era, a very optimistic, distinctly Western-centric answer was dominating global development policies. Driven by this huge interdisciplinary mix of economics, sociology, and political science, modernization theory took hold. By 1960, Walt Rostow publishes his incredibly influential Stages of Economic Growth. But then, as you move into the 1970s, critics really start noticing the shortcomings of this approach, and dependency theory rises up as a powerful counternarrative straight from the global south. And keep in mind, this all happened right in the middle of the Cold War, which massively influenced the direction of these ideas.
So, what made this theory so attractive to policymakers at institutions like the UN and the World Bank? Well, simply put, it offered a tidy, structured playbook. It put economic growth, things like rapid industrialization and building infrastructure, right at the very center of development. And arguably the most important part, it claimed universal applicability. It basically argued that literally any society on Earth could become wealthy if they just followed this exact same path.
Which brings us to part 2, Rostow's 5 stages. The key architect of this framework was an economist named Walt Rostow. He proposed a very specific, upward linear ladder of economic progress. He essentially argued that all countries have to climb strictly upward over time, moving step by step from a basic agrarian economy to a highly advanced one. Let's walk through his 5 steps. It starts at the bottom with traditional society, which is heavily focused on subsistence agriculture with very little technology. Next, you hit the preconditions for takeoff, where an entrepreneurial class starts to emerge and infrastructure gets built. Then comes the absolutely crucial 3rd stage, the takeoff. This is where rapid industrialization kicks in and labor shifts aggressively from farming to manufacturing. Stage 4 is the drive to maturity, where the economy diversifies and technology spreads everywhere. Finally, societies reach the age of high-mass consumption. Here, the focus shifts heavily to consumer goods and services. Think of the United States in the mid-20th century.
But we really can't ignore the historical context here. When Rostow published his book in 1960, he gave it a very telling subtitle, A Non-Communist Manifesto. Written at the absolute height of the Cold War, this model was explicitly designed to present capitalist development as the only viable path to prosperity. It was meant to directly counter communist alternatives. So this was a political roadmap just as much as an economic one.
Moving on to part 3, flaws in the linear model. Because as neat as those stages look on paper, real history is rarely that tidy. Scholars very quickly began poking holes in this Western-centric narrative. Empirically, the model just struggles to hold up. For example, Rostow claimed a society needed exactly a 10% investment rate to trigger that magical takeoff. But economists later found this threshold to be totally arbitrary. On top of that, historical stages often overlap. Countries like Denmark and New Zealand achieved takeoff through agricultural development, rather than just abandoning it for factories. But perhaps most critically, Rostow's model assumes all countries start from the exact same baseline, the same climate, the same resources. It is entirely blind to the history of colonialism. It offers no framework at all to understand how centuries of resource extraction by European powers actively shaped the very conditions it labeled as underdeveloped.
And beyond the hard economics, there was a deep cultural critique too. Talcott Parsons, who was another major architect of modernization theory, provocatively labeled traditional values as the enemy of progress. This highlights a massive flaw. The theory was profoundly ethnocentric. It treated Western development as the universal ideal and essentially pathologized the diverse cultures, kinship ties, and traditions of the global South. It effectively blamed a country's poverty on its own internal backwardness.
Which leads us perfectly into Part 4, the dependency theory alternative. Born largely out of Latin America in the 1970s, thinkers like Raul Prebisch, Fernando Enrique Cardozo, and Andre Gunder Frank developed a radical counter-narrative. The crucial point here is a stark contrast. Think of it like this. Modernization theory looks inward, arguing that poverty is caused by a nation's own internal cultural or institutional failings. Dependency theory, on the other hand, looks outward. It argues that poverty is caused by external global structures and historical exploitation. It shifts the blame away from the poorer countries themselves and places it squarely on the global economic architecture. At the very heart of dependency theory is the core-periphery hierarchy. The argument is that the global capitalist system is fundamentally structured so that wealthy core nations extract cheap raw materials and labor from poorer peripheral nations. Those wealthy nations then process those materials and sell the finished goods back for a massive profit. According to this theory, the terms of global trade are structurally rigged to benefit the core, keeping the periphery locked in a deliberate, never-ending loop of underdevelopment. Andre Gunder Frank actually coined a famous phrase for this, the development of underdevelopment. This is a really powerful concept. Frank argued that underdevelopment isn't just a natural starting line that countries haven't managed to move past yet. Rather, underdevelopment is an active condition created by the wealthy core. The rich nations accumulated their wealth precisely by extracting it from colonial territories, meaning the global system requires poor nations to stay poor, just so the rich nations can stay rich. But let's anchor this back to reality for a second, because just as modernization theory has its flaws, so does dependency theory. Neither is perfect. Modernization theorists will often point to Singapore as a glowing success story of following the capitalist playbook, even though, as we mentioned, countries like New Zealand totally defied those strict stages. Conversely, while dependency theory brilliantly explains so much of Latin American history, it really struggles to account for nations like South Korea and Taiwan. Both of those countries integrated heavily into the global capitalist system and managed to develop rapidly, which directly complicates the claim that global integration inevitably causes underdevelopment. Finally, Part 5. Why these debates matter. Now, you might be wondering, okay, this is fascinating history, but why should I care today? Well, because this isn't just an academic squabble from the past. The ghosts of these exact theoretical debates continue to dictate billion-dollar development policies right now. When organizations like the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank offer massive loans to developing nations, they frequently attach strict strings to that money. If aid is conditioned on a country liberalizing its trade, privatizing its public services, or adopting Western-style governance, well, that is modernization theory in action today. Understanding the critiques of these theories helps us grasp exactly why so many modern development interventions in Africa, Asia, and Latin America have produced such uneven and honestly sometimes disappointing results.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a lingering thought. We've explored the inward, linear focus of modernization theory and the structural, outward focus of dependency theory. But can any single theory fully capture the immense complexity of why some nations develop while others do not? Or does the real truth lie somewhere in the messy, complicated intersection of both? It's a question that really challenges us to rethink how we view progress, wealth, and fairness on a global scale. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep questioning the world around you.